We are now halfway through Obi-Wan Kenobi. Part 3 aired this morning, and it definitely felt like the midpoint of the story where our hero is at his lowest point. Now that we're home from Star Wars Celebration, let's talk about the episode the way we normally do in a full review. We open with Obi-Wan trying again to reach Qui-Gon as he grapples with the reality that Anakin is still alive. At the same time, we get to see what's left of Anakin being assembled on Mustafar. I love that we're seeing Kenobi learn this on screen. I think it stands to reason he could have gone 10 years without hearing the name Darth Vader while living in a cave on Tatooine. I'm fine with that for lore reasons or whatever, but I love what it means for the story. That it's a shock to him, that he already knew he had failed Anakin as a teacher, that was bad enough, but now he knows he failed to finish the job he was given to kill Darth Vader. It gives even more weight to Vader's lines about Obi-Wan's failures being complete in Return of the Jedi. Like Kenobi says in the episode, he's made some mistakes, and they're very clearly knocking him even further out of balance with the Force. He's desperate to connect with Qui-Gon, but that's simply not going to happen until he acts a little more like Qui-Gon. He's got to center himself, face those mistakes, confront his fear, and become a Jedi again. I love seeing Mustafar and Fortress Vader, that all looks fantastic, movie quality just like we saw in Rogue One, but we're seeing the fires of Mustafar boiling and raging just like Vader. In Rogue One, the lava flows were a little more calm, to the point where everyone was like, is that Mustafar? Granted, we also didn't know Vader had a castle yet, but my point is I like the idea of the volcanic climate as an indicator of Vader's temperament within the story. Inside, he discusses the hunt for Kenobi, and Reva is clearly trying to pin the Grand Inquisitor's stabbing on the Jedi. The script is careful to cut her off before she mentions his condition, and that's because I think, at least for now, the series is trying to have it both ways. They don't say he's dead, because anyone who's watched Star Wars Rebels knows he isn't, but if someone is just watching the live-action shows, the Grand Inquisitor's demise means even more competition between the remaining Inquisitors. Their motivation is to gain the title of Grand Inquisitor for themselves. Removing the Grand Inquisitor serves this story right now, even if we know it doesn't last. That said, I think it would work just as well to show that he's in a coma or something. That would put a ticking clock on Reva, who would then have to capture Kenobi and take control before he woke back up. On the transport, Obi-Wan and Leia have a quick talk about the Force, the first time he ever had to explain the concept to one of the Skywalker kids, but it's a good look into his psyche at this point. He says it feels safe, like turning on a light when you're afraid of the dark. From what we've seen so far in this series, he is barely using the Force, so I don't think Kenobi has been feeling any level of safety or comfort in these past 10 years. That's explored further as they get to Hodge's meeting point, and he immediately gives up hope that anyone is coming to help them. He has got some serious trust issues, and why wouldn't he? His best friend slash brother slash Padawan betrayed him and everything he stood for. It's like Anakin's fall made Obi-Wan lose hope in humanity itself. It's on his mind to the point that he is seeing Anakin in the fields. He doesn't know what his old apprentice has become yet, or what he looks like, so he's just seeing the man he once knew. Over on Nur, we visit the Fortress Inquisitorius for the first time in live action. As a massive fan of the game Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order, I was thrilled to see it. If you're unfamiliar, it's just the home base of the Inquisitors, and it is right around the corner from Mustafar. We see the tension set up between the fifth brother and the third sister as they compete for the Grand Inquisitor's seat. I like how the other, as of yet unnamed Inquisitor is just sitting there like, I'm good where I'm at. I'm sure she's quietly got her own ambitions, but the way the Inquisitors operate is a good example of the nature of the dark side. They can work together to a degree, but at the end of the day, they're all greedy. They all want more power, and they don't want to share it for the good of the entire group. Back on Mapuzo, Leia flags down a transport despite Obi-Wan's objections. As a child, she's kind of the opposite of her protector at this point. We've been told she rarely or maybe never leaves Alderaan. She doesn't know what the galaxy is like, and she still has faith in people where Kenobi seemingly has none. Her trust in Freck does turn out to be misplaced, but I still think there's something to be said about Leia's optimism and capacity to give everyone a chance to show their worth before writing them off. After all, Leia Organa is the human embodiment of hope in Star Wars. As stormtroopers join the transport, the tension starts to ramp up. I love that Leia can get under Obi-Wan's skin to the point that he gets flustered and calls her the wrong name. But what a good cover to say that she simply reminds him of her mother. Leia can tell he really did know her real mother, and I feel like we're building to something there, but to what, I'm not quite sure yet. Their talk is cut short in a fun action scene and shootout with a probe droid and stormtroopers until they are eventually saved by an Imperial officer of all people, but the probe alerts the Inquisitors who prepare to head for Mapuzo. The officer, named Tala, reveals that she went to the meetup point, but nobody was there, so if Obi-Wan had just had a little faith, everything that happens in the rest of this episode could have been avoided. Inside the safe house, introductions are made, and Kenobi learns that there is a whole network of people risking their lives to save Jedi and Force-sensitive children. He even sees that his old friend Quinlan Vos is still alive and part of that network. Compare that to his interactions with Nari in Part 1. Obi-Wan refused to risk anything to help anyone. I understand where he's coming from. Of all the surviving Jedi, he has the most to deal with. He has immense guilt, he admits to making mistakes, but so has Tala. She joined the Empire, realized what it really was, and has begun to make amends. She didn't just wallow, she tried to use her status within the Empire for good. At this moment, Obi-Wan is being helped by an Imperial officer and a droid. It's not a battle droid, but still, Kenobi is finding allies in past and current enemies. Tala says she can't imagine the great Obi-Wan Kenobi doing anything wrong, and he replies that he just goes by Ben now. I love that his alias is another way for him to bury his true self. Leia even calls it out in Part 2 that it's not a very Jedi-sounding name, because he hasn't been acting like a Jedi, but he's now surrounded by proof that his order can still help during the dark times. I think before the end of this series, he will call himself Obi-Wan Kenobi once again in a moment of victory and triumph as he becomes a true Jedi. But we're still a ways off from that because Darth Vader and the Inquisitors come to Mapuzo before they can make their escape. Vader's introduction to the planet is pure terror. Even the Inquisitors are clearly afraid of him, and Vader just starts murdering random civilians to draw his former master out, which kind of works. It's rough watching Obi-Wan like this, but that's absolutely the point. We want him to stride out that door and ignite his lightsaber in defense of the town. That's what a Jedi does. But instead he runs, which does lure Vader away, so that's something. But this is the Jedi Master that faced Darth Maul and Count Dooku and General Grievous with no fear. Now he has to face a manifestation of his own failure, a villain he created. It is so clear that he isn't ready for this fight. He grips his lightsaber and can't bring himself to turn it on. He runs again and then turns on his saber out of fear. And then he runs again. Like I said, it's frustrating, but it's gonna make his eventual victory feel that much better. But for now, he gets his butt absolutely handed to him. Darth Vader has never felt more like a horror villain, stalking his prey, appearing out of nowhere to attack, but he's not going in for the kill, he's going for pain. He could have easily ended the story of Ben Kenobi here and now, but instead he sets the world on fire just to watch him burn. That was shocking. But I think it's important. We're seeing Obi-Wan go through similar trials as Anakin. I admit his injuries aren't even remotely as bad, but still, it's a trial by fire, and Kenobi will come out the other side stronger where Vader did not. And we do see, as Vader is saved by the Imperial and the droid, that fire is the thing that separates them. So much of Star Wars is about choice. You can't choose everything that happens to you, but you can choose your response to it. Vader blames Kenobi for what happened to him, and he seeks revenge. How will Obi-Wan respond to being burned in the next episode? We'll find out next week. Cutting back to the town, Reva makes her way into the safe house, and I do want to talk about the third sister here. I wasn't sure about her in the first 2 episodes, but I think I'm understanding the character more and more. I think she is meant to be insecure. I think she's posturing and overcompensating to prove her worth and survive. We were shown that Order 66 scene at the start of the series, and she has got to be one of those younglings. That's not an original thought, plenty of people think that's the case. When we first saw her, she was a scared child. 10 years later, and she's still pretty young, and she's probably doing the only thing she knows how to do to survive. I mean, this is a story about survival during dark times. How do you survive without losing yourself? Obi-Wan hid who he truly is on Tatooine. He literally buried it deep down. Reva was likely captured and tortured into becoming an Inquisitor. For a reason we don't know yet, she is treated as the least of them. When you work for someone like Vader, you know you are one mistake away from a Force choke, so gaining power and status seems like the best path to survival. Inside the safe house, she sees names carved on the wall, names she probably recognizes. She sees the Jedi insignia and almost reaches out to touch it. I think she's angry not at those survivors so much as she is about her fate. We don't know exactly what happened to her, but I think she's seeing she could have escaped. She could have had a different life instead of being forced into the role of a hunter. She is seeing proof of children that are being saved by the Empire when she was a child that was taken by it. That scared little girl is still inside of her because when you work for Darth Vader, you live your entire life in fear. I think she's about to reach a pivotal moment in her story because in her final scene, the third sister is now the one taking a scared little girl to the Empire. She doesn't know that Leia is Force sensitive yet, but if her abilities are even hinted at, her fate will be the same as Reva's. And that's the end of part 3. I like everything that's happening with the story, the characters, and the writing. The content is all good. I do think this episode had the weakest production design. Daiyu looked so good and was such a spectacle that Mapuzo kinda stood out to me. It reminded me of the tragedy episode in The Mandalorian. It just felt like we were in the hills of Los Angeles for a decent amount of the episode, but it is what it is. That said, Nur and Mustafar looked great. I'm just nitpicking Mapuzo, but I have to accept that even Star Wars has a budget. Let me know what you thought of part 3 in the comments. If you haven't already, please like this video, subscribe to the channel for all our Obi-Wan Kenobi coverage, follow us on TikTok, Twitter, and Instagram, and consider checking out our Patreon page for even more. Like our video reactions and audio commentaries for the episodes, which will come out soon now that we're home from Star Wars Celebration. As always, thanks for watching, and may the Force be with you.